The man's hands stopped mid-motion on the leather straps of his pack, and Delara felt her heart twist as she watched him from across the cabin, her voice barely above a whisper when she said, "No human ever stayed." Finley Zane looked up from where he crouched beside his bedroll, lamplight catching the warm brown of his eyes and turning them amber. He was broader than her through the shoulders and chest, built solid like the draft horses that pulled supply wagons. And when he smiled, it carried that same easy charm he had worn since arriving with the autumn cattle drive 3 weeks ago. But something shifted in his expression now, something that looked like understanding mixed with determination. "Then I will be the first," he said, standing slowly and crossing the rough wooden floor until he stood close enough that she could see the stubble darkening his jaw. "I promise you, Delara, I am not going anywhere." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Outside, wind rattled through the valley pines, and somewhere distant a cow lowed, restless in the temporary pens the drovers had built near the stream. Soon the drive would move on, pushing south through the mountain passes before the first hard snow, and every other year Delara had watched the men leave without a backward glance. Some had shared her fire. A few had shared more. None had ever spoken of staying. She turned away, busying her hands with the kettle hanging over the hearth. "You say that now, but winter comes hard here. Spring feels like a lifetime away, summer even longer." "Good." His voice was closer now, just behind her left shoulder. "I have always wanted to see what real winter looks like." Delara allowed herself a small laugh, the sound catching rough in her throat. "You will regret those words when the snow reaches the windowsills and we cannot open the door for a week. Will you be there, of course? This is my home." "Then I will not regret anything." She turned to face him fully then, studying the planes of his face in the flickering firelight. He stood perhaps an inch shorter than her, which put him at a decent height for a human man, and his frame carried the kind of weight that came from years of hard work rather than softness. His dark hair needed cutting and his clothes needed mending, but his eyes were steady and warm and utterly sincere. "You do not know me," she said quietly. "Not really. 3 weeks of sharing meals and talking by the fire, that is not enough to make promises like this." Finley reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in both of his. His palms were calloused and warm. "Then give me time to know you better. Give me the winter. Give me spring. I am not afraid of learning who you are." Something in Delara's chest loosened. Some tight knot of fear and old hurt she had carried so long she had forgotten it was there. She looked down at their joined hands, her green skin dark against his sun-bronzed tan, and felt the careful way he held her, like she was something precious rather than something to be endured. "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Why would you want to stay?" "The other drovers, they will talk. Your trail boss already looks at me like I am something dangerous. Marcus looks at everyone like that. It is his job." Finley's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "As for why, I think you know. I have been coming through this valley for 5 years now, and every year I look forward to it more. This year I realized it was not the valley I was excited about. It was you." Delara felt heat rise in her cheeks, felt her small tusks press against her lower lip as she fought down a smile. "You are a fool, probably." His grin was unrepentant, "but I am a fool who keeps his promises." The cattle drive left 2 days later with the sunrise, a river of brown and white bodies flowing south through the valley like water finding its course. Delara stood outside her cabin and watched the drovers pass, counting familiar faces, seeing the curious looks they shot toward Finley as he stood beside her rather than mounted and ready to ride. Marcus Kane, the trail boss, reined his gray mare to a stop and looked down at them with weathered eyes. He was an older man, 60 if he was a day, with silver threading through his beard and the kind of steady authority that came from decades on the trail. "You are sure about this, Zane?" he asked, directing the question at Finley but glancing at Delara with an expression she could not quite read. "I am sure," Finley said firmly. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, leather creaking as he shifted in the saddle. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "We will be back through in the spring. May if the passes clear early, June more likely. I will be here." "We both will," Delara added, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Something that might have been approval flickered across Marcus's face. "Fair enough. You know where to find us if you need anything before then." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that encompassed both of them, then clicked to his horse and moved on, leaving them standing in the settling dust as the last of the cattle disappeared around the bend. The silence that followed felt enormous. Delara became suddenly, acutely aware that they were alone now, truly alone, in a way they had not been before. The drovers had been camped less than a mile downstream for weeks, close enough that voices sometimes carried on the wind. Now there was only the two of them and the valley and the long months of winter stretching ahead. "So," Finley said, turning to face her with that easy smile, "what happens first in getting ready for mountain winter?" Delara looked at him, at this man who had chosen to stay when no one else ever had, and felt something warm and fragile unfurling in her chest like the first green shoots of spring. "First we make sure we have enough firewood to last until March. Then we check the chimney for nests. Then we hunt and smoke enough meat that we will not starve if the game moves to lower ground. That sounds like a lot of work. It is. Good thing there are two of us then." She led him into the forest that afternoon, showing him which trees were dead enough to fell without guilt, teaching him to read the forest the way she had learned from her mother and her grandmother before that. Finley proved a quick study and a hard worker, his axe biting deep into seasoned pine while she worked 20 yards away, the rhythm of their chopping creating a kind of music in the quiet woods. They worked until the sun slanted golden through the trees, and Delara's shoulders burned with good exhaustion. When they returned to the cabin, arms loaded with split wood, Finley started stacking it against the north wall while she went inside to start dinner. The domesticity of it felt strange and new and somehow right, like a coat that fit perfectly despite being made for someone else. "Tell me about your family," Delara said later, when they sat across from each other at her small table, bowls of stew steaming between them. "You said you have been doing the drives for 5 years. Is that where you come from, the cattle business?" Finley's expression shuddered slightly, the first time she had seen him look anything less than open. He took a slow bite of stew, chewing carefully before answering. "My family has a ranch downriver about 40 miles south of where the drive ends. Big operation. My father built it from nothing. But you do not work there." "No." The word came out flat. "I left when I was 18, joined up with Marcus and have been moving ever since." Delara waited, sensing there was more but knowing better than to push. She had her own shadows, her own reasons for living alone in a valley where most orcs preferred the company of clans. Everyone carried something. Finley met her eyes across the table. "My father and we did not see eye to eye on much, still do not, I imagine. He wanted me to be something I was not. I wanted to be myself, so I left. Does he know where you are?" "He knows I work the drives. Marcus and he have done business before." Finley's jaw tightened. "I just never go home when the cattle get delivered. I take my pay and find work elsewhere until it is time to head north again." "That must be hard," Delara said softly, "being so close but staying away. It was easier when I had a reason to keep moving." He looked at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her breath catch. Now I have a reason to stay put, and staying put means eventually I will have to face what I have been running from. Delara reached across the table and took his hand, the gesture feeling natural now, like they had been doing it for years instead of days. You do not have to figure it all out tonight. Winter is long. We have time. His fingers tightened around hers. Thank you. They fell into a rhythm as autumn deepened into the first kisses of winter. Finley proved handy with tools, fixing the loose board in the porch and patching the roof, where weather had worked a few shingles free. Delara taught him to track deer through the early snow, showed him how to read the signs that meant a storm was coming, shared the knowledge she had gathered through 26 years of living close to the land. In the evenings they talked. Long, meandering conversations that ranged from silly to serious, from childhood memories to dreams for the future, from favorite foods to fears that woke them in the night. Delara learned that Finley could not carry a tune to save his life, but loved to sing anyway, that he had a gift for making her laugh, that he was patient and kind and stubborn in the best possible way. She also learned that he carried deep hurt from his family, wounds that had not healed despite the years. His father, Franklin Zane, was a hard man who measured worth in acres and profit, who saw love as weakness and tenderness as failure. Finley's mother had died when he was 12, and after that the ranch had become cold and joyless, a place of work and duty with no room for anything softer. I tried, Finley told her one night as they sat before the fire, snow falling heavy outside. I really did. I worked harder than anyone. I learned everything he tried to teach me, but it was never enough. He wanted someone who would expand the empire, who would marry well and produce heirs and carry on the Zane name like it was some kind of legacy worth dying for. And you wanted something different. I wanted to matter for who I was, not what I could do for the family business. He stared into the flames, face drawn with old pain. I wanted him to be proud of me because I was his son, not because I could turn a profit on spring calves. Delara shifted closer, closing the small distance between them on the worn rug. I think you are worth being proud of. Finley turned to look at her, and the warmth in his eyes made her heart skip. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you keep your promises. I know you work hard and laugh easily and treat me like I am someone worth staying for. She reached up, hesitant, and touched his face, her fingers dark against his cheek. I know that I am glad you are here. He leaned into her touch, eyes closing briefly. When he opened them again, they were bright with something that looked like hope mixed with desire. Can I kiss you? The question was so earnest, so careful, that Delara felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. Yes. He kissed her like she was something precious, his lips soft against hers, one hand coming up to cup the back of her head while the other found her waist. Delara melted into him, into the warmth and solidness of his body, into the gentle way he held her like she might break if he was not careful. Her small tusks made the angle slightly awkward, but they adjusted, learning each other, finding what worked. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Finley rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that since about the third day I met you. Delara laughed, the sound shaky. Why did you wait so long? I wanted to be sure you wanted it too. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I wanted to be sure I was not just another drover passing through. You are not, she said firmly. You are Finley. You are the man who stayed. They took things slowly after that, building toward intimacy in careful increments, learning each other's bodies the way they had learned each other's hearts. Delara had been with men before, brief encounters that felt more like transactions than tenderness, and she had long ago made peace with the idea that it was all she would ever have. But Finley was different. Finley touched her like she was a wonder, kissed her like she was a gift, made love to her with a reverence that left her shaking and raw and more complete than she had ever felt. Winter deepened. Snow piled high against the cabin walls and ice formed thick on the stream. They rationed their supplies carefully, stretched the smoked meat and dried beans, made everything last. On the coldest nights they huddled together under every blanket they owned, sharing warmth and whispered secrets and quiet laughter. Finley carved her a set of wooden buttons to replace the broken ones on her good coat. Delara sewed him a new shirt from fabric she had been saving, measuring it carefully to fit his broad shoulders. They gave each other small gifts, small kindnesses, small proofs of care that added up to something large and sustaining. But as winter wore on toward spring, Delara noticed Finley growing quieter, more withdrawn. He would stare out the window at the snow-covered valley with a distant expression, and when she asked what he was thinking he would smile and say nothing, but the smile never quite reached his eyes. Finally, on a night when the wind howled like a living thing and rattled the shutters, she confronted him directly. "Talk to me," she said, setting down her mending and fixing him with a steady look. "Something is bothering you, I can see it." Finley sat at the table, whittling a piece of wood into some shape she could not yet identify. He did not look up. "The drive will be back through in a few months, May or June, like Marcus said. I know. They will want me to help bring the cattle down to the ranch, to my father's ranch." Now he did look up and his eyes were troubled. "I told you I would stay, I meant it. But staying means I cannot keep running, it means I have to face him eventually." Delara set aside her sewing and moved to sit across from him. "Are you afraid?" Terrified. The admission came out rough. "What if he is still angry? What if he wants nothing to do with me? What if I go back and it is worse than when I left? Or what if it is better?" Delara reached across and stilled his hands, stilling the nervous movement of the knife. "You are not the same person who left. You have grown." "Maybe he has too. I doubt it. My father does not change. Everyone changes. Time does that." She squeezed his hands gently. "But even if he has not, you still need to try, not for him, for you, so you can stop carrying this weight." Finley was quiet for a long time, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the moan of wind outside. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Will you come with me, when the time comes?" The question surprised her. "To your father's ranch?" "Yes, I know it is a lot to ask. I know he will probably say terrible things, but I think I can face it if you are there." His eyes met hers, desperate and hopeful. "I need you with me." Delara felt fear spike through her chest. Meeting family was complicated enough, without adding in the fact that she was an orc, and he was human, and most humans did not look kindly on such pairings. But she looked at Finley, at this man who had kept his promise through the long, cold months, who had stayed when everyone else left, and knew she could not refuse him. "I will go," she said. "We will face it together." Relief washed over his face like sunrise. He brought her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of gratitude and love that made her heart ache. "Thank you. I do not deserve you." "Yes, you do," she said firmly, "and I do not want to hear you say otherwise." Spring came slowly, the snow retreating inch by grudging inch, revealing brown grass and muddy earth and the first brave shoots of wildflowers. The streams swelled with meltwater, and the valley came alive with birdsong and the rustle of animals emerging from winter dens. Delara and Finley worked to prepare the cabin for the warmer months, airing out blankets and checking the garden plot and making plans for planting. They also talked, long, serious conversations about what would happen when the drive came through, what they would say to his father, how they would handle whatever came. Finley grew less withdrawn as they planned, as if having a strategy made the fear more manageable. Delara simply tried to steady herself for whatever lay ahead. The cattle drive arrived on a warm morning in late May, the sound of lowing and hoofbeats echoing through the valley like thunder. Delara and Finley stood outside the cabin to greet them, and Marcus rode up with a broad smile creasing his weathered face. "You made it through," he said, looking between them with obvious approval. "Both of you, looking healthy too." "We had a good winter," Finley said, reaching over to take Delara's hand in a gesture that felt both natural and defiant. "Best one I have had in a long time." Marcus's eyes dropped to their joined hands and his smile widened. "I am glad to hear it. We are pushing through to the lower pastures starting tomorrow. You planning to ride with us?" Finley's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed steady. "All the way to the ranch, yes. There is something I need to do." Understanding flickered across Marcus's face. "About time, if you ask me." "Your father is not getting any younger. Is he well?" The question came out reluctant, like Finley was not sure he wanted the answer. "Well enough, cantankerous as ever, but I think he will be glad to see you." Marcus tipped his hat. "We pull out at dawn, be ready." That night, lying in bed with Finley's arm around her and his breath warm against her hair, Delara felt fear coiling tight in her stomach. She had faced down wolves and bears and hard winters alone, but the thought of facing Franklin Zane made her want to run. "What if he hates me?" she whispered into the darkness. Finley's arm tightened around her. "Then he is a fool and his opinion does not matter. But he is your father, and you are the woman I love." He rolled to face her, his eyes serious in the moonlight filtering through the window. "I have not said it before because I was afraid it was too soon, but I am saying it now. I love you, Delara. Whatever happens tomorrow or the next day or the day after that, that will not change." Tears burned hot in her eyes. "I love you too, so much it scares me." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Then we will be scared together, but we will not run." The journey south took 3 days of hard travel, the cattle moving in a steady river of brown bodies while the drovers worked to keep them together and moving forward. Delara rode one of the spare horses, a patient bay mare who did not seem bothered by her orcish rider, and Finley stayed close beside her, pointing out landmarks and telling stories from previous drives. On the third afternoon, as they crested a rise, Finley went very still in his saddle. "There," he said quietly, pointing to a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a valley below. "That is the Zane Ranch." Delara studied it, taking in the large main house built from stone and timber, the barns and outbuildings, the corrals and pastures stretching in every direction. It was impressive, prosperous, the kind of operation that represented decades of hard work and careful planning. She could see why Franklin Zane was proud of it. She could also see why it might feel like a prison to someone who wanted a different kind of life. "It is beautiful," she said honestly. "It is my father's whole world." Finley's hands were tight on the reins. "I hope we are doing the right thing." "We are." Delara reached over and touched his arm. "Trust me." They brought the cattle into the lower pastures as the sun began to set, spreading them out across the rich grassland while the ranch hands came out to help with the work. Delara caught curious looks, some friendly and some less so, but no one said anything directly. She helped where she could, keeping close to Finley, drawing strength from his presence. When the cattle were finally settled and the horses seen to, Marcus led them toward the main house. Delara felt her heart hammering as they climbed the porch steps, as Marcus knocked firmly on the heavy wooden door. It opened to reveal a man in his late 50s, tall and broad-shouldered with gray hair and a face weathered by sun and hard living. His eyes were the same warm brown as Finley's, but where Finley's held kindness, Franklin Zane's held hard assessment. Those eyes swept over Marcus, then Finley, then finally landed on Delara. His expression went carefully blank. "Marcus," he said, his voice deep and rough. "Good to see you made it through again. Franklin, good to see you too." Marcus gestured to Finley. "I believe you know this one." There was a long, terrible moment of silence. Then Franklin's gaze shifted fully to his son, and something flickered in his eyes that might have been pain or regret or hope, too quick to name. "Finley," he said, "it has been a while. 5 years." Finley's voice was steady, but Delara could feel the tension radiating off him. "I know I should have come sooner. I am sorry." Franklin's jaw worked. He looked at Delara again, then back to his son. "You going to introduce me to your companion? This is Delara, Delara Everwood. She is the reason I finally found the courage to come home." Finley's hand found hers, fingers lacing together. "She is the reason for a lot of things." Delara expected anger, disgust, rejection. Instead, Franklin simply nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "You better come inside, all of you. We have things to discuss." The inside of the house was warm and well kept, with sturdy furniture and the kind of lived-in comfort that came from years of daily use. Franklin led them to a large kitchen and gestured for them to sit at a scarred wooden table while he poured coffee with practiced efficiency. "I will leave you to it," Marcus said, backing toward the door. "I need to check on the men." "Thank you," Finley said, and Marcus tipped his hat before disappearing. The silence that followed felt heavy. Franklin set mugs in front of each of them and then sat down heavily, regarding his son across the table. 5 years, he said finally. 5 years and not a word. I did not even know if you were alive." "I am sorry," Finley said again. "I was angry and stubborn. And I did not think you wanted to hear from me." "Of course I wanted to hear from you. You are my son." Franklin's voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Do you think I did not worry? Do you think I did not wonder where you were, what you were doing, if you were happy? I thought you were glad I was gone. One less disappointment around to remind you that I was not the son you wanted." Franklin closed his eyes, pain etching deep lines in his face. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "You were never a disappointment." "I was just too much of a fool to tell you that." Finley went very still. "What? I was hard on you, too hard. I know that now." Franklin's hands were shaking slightly where they wrapped around his mug. "Your mother, she knew how to balance me, how to soften my rough edges. When she died, I did not know how to be gentle anymore. I only knew how to work, how to build, how to push forward, and I pushed you away." Delara felt tears stinging her eyes at the raw honesty in the old man's voice. She squeezed Finley's hand under the table, offering silent support. "I thought I was protecting you," Franklin continued, "teaching you to be strong, to be tough enough to handle this world, but all I did was make you feel like you were not enough." He looked directly at Finley now and his voice broke. "I am sorry, son. I am so sorry. I have had 5 years to think about all the things I should have said, and I still do not know if I have the right words, but I need you to know that I am proud of you. I have always been proud of you." Finley made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He scrubbed at his eyes with his free hand. "I needed to hear that so badly when I was younger. I know, and I should have said it." Franklin's gaze shifted to Delara. "Is she why you finally came back?" "Yes," Finley said without hesitation. "She made me see that I could not move forward while I was still running from the past. She gave me the courage to face you." Franklin studied Delara for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then, to her complete surprise, he smiled. "Then I owe her a debt I can never repay. Thank you, Miss Everwood, for bringing my son home." Delara felt shock ripple through her. "You are not angry about what I am, angry that you are an orc." Franklin shook his head. "I will not pretend the world does not have opinions about such things. I will not pretend there are not people who will judge you harshly. But I learned a long time ago that love is too rare and precious to waste on caring what small-minded people think. If my son loves you and you love him, that is all that matters to me." The tears Delara had been holding back spilled over then, hot tracks down her green cheeks. She had braced herself for hatred and found acceptance instead, had prepared for a fight and found welcome. It was too much and not enough, and absolutely everything she had not dared to hope for. Finley was crying too, unashamed, and Franklin stood and came around the table to pull his son into a hard embrace. They held each other for a long time while Delara watched, heart full to bursting, seeing the fractured pieces of a relationship beginning to knit back together. When they finally pulled apart, both wiping at their eyes, Franklin smiled. "So what are your plans? Are you going back to the drives or are you staying put somewhere?" "We have a place," Finley said. "Up in the valley where Delara lives. We were thinking of building a homestead there. Maybe running some cattle of our own." "You will need stock then, and supplies." Franklin's expression turned thoughtful. "What if I helped with that? An investment in your future, a way to make up for lost time." "Father, you do not have to do that." "I know I do not have to, I want to." Franklin looked between them. "I want to be part of your lives again if you will let me. I want to meet the woman who made you brave enough to come home. I want to know my son as he is now, not who I tried to make him be." Finley looked at Delara, question in his eyes, and she nodded. "We would like that," he said. "Very much." They stayed at the ranch for a week, and it was strange and healing and sometimes awkward as Finley and Franklin learned to be around each other again. They worked side by side in the pastures, talked late into the evening over dinner, slowly built new patterns of interaction that made room for who they both were now, rather than who they had been 5 years ago. Franklin was gruff and set in his ways, but Delara saw a genuine effort in how he treated her, asking about her life in the valley, listening when she talked about her gardens and her hunting, making space for her at his table and in his home. He was not perfect, sometimes said things that came out wrong or showed the prejudices of his generation, but he tried. And that trying meant everything. On the last night before they planned to head north again, Franklin presented them with a detailed list of cattle he was gifting them, along with supplies and tools, and everything they would need to build a proper homestead. It was generous to the point of overwhelming, and when Finley tried to protest, Franklin simply held up a hand. "I have more than enough," he said firmly, "and no one else to leave it to. Let me do this. Let me help you build something good." "Thank you," Finley said, voice thick with emotion. "For everything, for understanding, for accepting us." Franklin pulled him into another embrace, and this time it was easier, more natural. "Thank you for giving me another chance. I will try not to waste it." He hugged Delara too, the gesture slightly stiff but sincere, and she felt something loosen in her chest that she had not known was tight. This man, this human who had every reason and opportunity to reject her, had instead chosen acceptance, had chosen love for his son over prejudice. It gave her hope for what their future might hold. They left the next morning with the cattle Franklin had gifted them, along with 2 ranch hands he insisted on sending to help drive them north and assist with the initial building. The journey back took longer with the smaller herd, but Delara did not mind. She rode beside Finley, watched him grow lighter and freer with each mile, saw the old shadows lift from his eyes. When they finally came over the last ridge and saw the valley spread below them, green and gold in the late spring sunshine, Finley let out a long breath. "Home," he said simply. "Yes," Delara agreed. "Home." They spent the summer building, turning Delara's small cabin into something larger and more permanent, adding a barn and corrals for the cattle, planting gardens and laying in supplies. The ranch hands Franklin had sent, two brothers named Jacob and Matthew, worked hard and treated Delara with easy respect that made the whole process smoother. Marcus brought the fall drive-through in September, stopping to admire the progress they had made. "This is good work," he said, walking the new fences and inspecting the sturdy barn. "You two have built something real here." "We plan to keep building," Finley said. "Maybe expand the herd, maybe add some horses. We have time to figure it out." Marcus smiled. "Your father would be proud." "I think he is," Finley said, and the certainty in his voice made Delara's heart swell. As autumn deepened, they established new rhythms. The cattle grazed in the valley pastures, healthy and content. The garden yielded more than enough for two. The cabin stayed warm and full of life and laughter. And slowly, carefully, they built a life that belonged entirely to them. Franklin visited in October, riding up with a pack horse loaded with gifts, and a nervous expression that softened when they welcomed him warmly. He stayed for 3 days, working alongside them, sharing meals, getting to know Delara better and rebuilding his relationship with his son one conversation at a time. On his last evening, as they sat around the fire, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "I have been thinking," he said, "about the future, about legacy." Finley looked up from whittling, cautious. "What about it?" "The ranch is too much for me to handle alone. I am getting older. I need help." Franklin met his son's eyes. "I was hoping you might consider coming down for the busy seasons, bringing Delara with you. Working with me instead of for me." "Like a partnership?" Finley asked slowly. "Exactly like that. You have your place here and I respect that. I am not asking you to give it up, but maybe we could share the work, share the responsibility, build something together." Franklin's voice went rough. "I do not want to waste any more time, son. I want us to be family again in whatever way that works." Finley looked at Delara, question in his eyes, and she nodded. "I think that sounds good," he said. "We can work out the details, but yes, I would like that." Relief and joy washed over Franklin's weathered face. "Good. That is good." Winter came again, but this year it felt different. Delara was not alone waiting for spring, was not wondering if the human who shared her fire would stay or go. Finley was here, would always be here, as constant as the mountains and just as solid. They spent the cold months planning for the next year, talking about the future, dreaming together about all the things they would build. On a night when snow fell soft outside and the fire burned warm inside, Finley reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "I made this," he said, opening it to reveal a ring carved from antler, simple and beautiful. "It is not much, but I wanted to ask you properly. Delara Everwood, will you marry me?" Delara felt her breath catch, felt tears spring to her eyes for the 100th time since this man had come into her life. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, and Delara thought about that night months ago when she had whispered that no human ever stayed. She had been so certain of her loneliness, so sure that she was not the kind of woman anyone would build a life around. But Finley had proven every fear wrong. He had stayed through winter and summer, through hard conversations and harder work. He had faced his past for her and built a future with her and loved her with a steadiness that never wavered. They married in the spring, a simple ceremony in the valley with Marcus and Franklin and the drovers as witnesses. Franklin wept openly during the vows, and afterward pulled Delara aside to tell her that she had given him back his son, and for that he would be forever grateful. The years that followed were good ones. They expanded the herd, built a bigger house, planted apple trees that would take years to bear fruit, but felt like promises to the future. Franklin became a regular presence in their lives, visiting often and working with them during the busy seasons. his relationship with Finley growing stronger and easier with time. Marcus retired after a few years and the drive stopped coming through, but by then, it did not matter. They had everything they needed right here in the valley. They had each other. They had family. They had a life they had built with their own hands and their own hearts. In the 3rd year of their marriage, Delara gave birth to a daughter. They named her Fiona, and she was perfect, with her father's warm brown eyes and her mother's green skin, and a smile that could light up the whole valley. Franklin cried when he met her, holding his granddaughter with gentle hands and a full heart. 2 years later came a son, Flynn, who had his mother's pointed ears and his father's solid build, and a laugh that rang like bells. The cabin that had once been a place of solitude became a place of noise and life and joy, filled with the sound of children playing and love freely given. Autumn came around again, the same season when everything had changed, and Delara stood outside watching Finley teach little Fiona how to stack firewood while Flynn toddled after chickens in the yard. Franklin was visiting again, sitting on the porch in the rocking chair Finley had built him, smoking his pipe and watching his family with quiet contentment. Delara felt arms slide around her waist from behind, felt Finley's chin rest on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About promises," she said. "About the night I told you no human ever stayed and you said you would be the first. I remember." His arms tightened. "Best promise I ever made. You kept it," she said, turning in his embrace to face him. "Through everything you kept it." "Of course I did." "You are worth staying for. You are worth everything." He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "I love you, Delara Zane." "I love you too," she said, and felt the truth of it ring through her whole being. That evening, after the children were in bed and Franklin had retired to the guest room, Delara and Finley sat on the porch watching the stars come out over the valley. The cattle were settled in the lower pasture, their dark shapes barely visible in the gathering dusk. Somewhere an owl called low and mournful, and the wind carried the scent of pine and coming winter. "Do you ever miss it?" Delara asked. "The drives, the moving, the freedom of the road." Finley was quiet for a moment, considering, then he shook his head. "No. I thought I was free when I was moving all the time, but I was just running. This is freedom, knowing where I belong, having roots, being home. Even when home means hard work and dirty diapers and fixing fences in the freezing cold," he laughed. "Especially then, because I am doing it with you." Delara leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. She thought about the girl she had been before he came, so certain of her loneliness, so convinced that she was not enough to make anyone stay. She thought about all the walls she had built around her heart and how gently he had dismantled them, brick by brick, until she could stand open and vulnerable and unafraid. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what? For staying. For choosing this. For choosing me." Finley turned her face up to his eyes serious in the starlight. "There was never any choice, love. It was always you. From the moment I met you, it was always going to be you." The next morning dawned bright and cold, the kind of perfect autumn day that made everything feel sharp and clear. Delara helped Franklin load his horse for the journey back to the ranch, while Finley got the children dressed and fed. It had become routine, these visits and departures, the easy rhythm of family coming and going but always circling back. "You will come for winter festival?" Franklin asked as he checked his saddle straps. "I know it is a journey with the little ones, but I would love to have all of you there." "We will come," Delara promised. "Fiona has been asking about the big house and all the decorations you told her about." Franklin smiled, and the expression transformed his weathered face into something younger and lighter. "I have been looking forward to showing her, and teaching Flynn to ride if you think he is ready." He will love that. He already follows Finley around the horses every chance he gets. Good stock, the Zane men, Franklin said with a wink. Stubborn as mules but loyal to the bone. Delara laughed. That they are. Franklin swung up into the saddle with the ease of long practice, then looked down at her with an expression gone serious. I mean it, thank you. For everything you have given me. My son back, a daughter, grandchildren, a reason to wake up happy in the morning. You saved this old man's life in more ways than one. You saved mine too, Delara said honestly. By being willing to see past what I am to who I am, by giving us your blessing. It meant everything. You made it easy. You love my son, you are a good mother, and you work harder than anyone I know. What more could I ask for? He touched the brim of his hat in his habitual farewell gesture. I will see you in a few weeks. Take care of my family. Always, Delara promised. She watched him ride down the valley trail, his figure growing smaller until he disappeared around the bend. Then she turned back to the house, to the sounds of Finley making the children giggle, to the warmth and chaos and beautiful normalcy of the life they had built. The days passed in the steady rhythm of work and family. They prepared for winter, stocked the larder, made sure the animals were ready for the cold. Fiona helped her mother collect eggs and learned to count by sorting apples. Flynn learned to walk properly and immediately used his newfound mobility to get into everything. Finley worked on building a bigger barn, planning ahead for the next year when they hoped to expand the herd even further. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, Delara would look around at everything they had created and feel almost dizzy with gratitude. She had spent so many years alone, so certain that this kind of happiness was not meant for someone like her. But here it was, messy and imperfect and absolutely real. Here was the man who had promised to stay and kept that promise every single day. Here were the children they had made together. Here was the home they had built with their own hands. One evening, as they tucked the children into bed, Fiona looked up at her with those big brown eyes so like her father's and asked, "Mama, did you always live here?" "I did," Delara said, smoothing back her daughter's dark hair. "I was born in this valley just like you." "And Papa? Did he live here too?" "No, sweetheart. Papa came from far away. He was traveling with the cattle and he stopped here and decided to stay." Fiona considered this with the seriousness of a 3-year-old. "Why did he stay?" Delara looked at Finley, standing in the doorway with Flynn drowsing on his shoulder, and felt her heart expand. "Because he fell in love, and when you really love something, you stay. I love you, Mama, and Papa, and Flynn, even when he is annoying, and Grandpa Franklin, and our house. So I am going to stay here forever and ever." "I hope you do, little one," Delara said, kissing her forehead. "But even if you go exploring when you are older, you will always have a home to come back to. That is what love means. It gives you roots and wings both." Fiona yawned hugely. "I just want the roots. Flying is scary." Finley laughed softly from the doorway, and Delara felt love wash through her so strongly it was almost painful. These people, this family, this life they had woven together from hope and hard work and promises kept. It was everything. It was more than enough. It was perfect in its imperfection. Later, when the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Delara and Finley stood at the window looking out over the moonlit valley. The cattle were dark shapes in the pasture. The barn stood solid against the sky. Everything they had built, everything they had become, spread before them like a map of the future. "I was thinking," Finley said quietly, "about expanding the apple orchard, maybe adding some pear trees too. We could make preserves, sell them at the winter market." "That sounds good." "We would need to clear more land, though." "I know. I was thinking we could ask the Johnson brothers to help, pay them fair wages for a month's work." He paused. Also, I was thinking about building a proper workshop, somewhere I can do woodworking through the winter. Maybe make furniture to sell along with the preserves. Delara leaned her head on his shoulder. You are full of plans tonight. I am full of hope, he corrected. For the first time in my life, I can see the future clearly. I know where I am going to be, who I am going to be with, what I am building toward. He turned to face her, cupping her face in his calloused hands. You gave me that. You gave me a future worth staying for. We gave it to each other, she said. I was just existing before you came, surviving, but you taught me how to live. He kissed her then, slow and sweet, and Delara felt the same flutter of excitement she had felt the first time, would probably feel every time for the rest of her life. This man, her husband, her partner, her best friend, the one who stayed. Winter festival at the Zane Ranch was everything Franklin had promised. The big house was decorated with pine boughs and candles, and there was food enough to feed an army. Fiona was enchanted by the grandeur of it all, running from room to room with wide eyes while Flynn clung to Finley's leg, slightly overwhelmed by all the new people. Franklin had invited neighbors and ranch hands and what felt like half the county, and while Delara got some curious looks and a few cold shoulders, most people were kind, or at least polite. Franklin made a point of introducing her as his daughter-in-law with obvious pride, and the warmth in his voice went a long way toward smoothing any rough edges. On the third day of celebrations, as Delara helped clear dishes from a long dinner, an older woman approached her. She had silver hair and sharp blue eyes and carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from decades of hard living. You are Finley's wife, the woman said. It was not a question. I am, Delara confirmed, bracing herself for whatever came next. The woman looked her over carefully. I was friends with his mother, knew Franklin for 40 years. That man was a shadow of himself after she died and even more of one after Finley left. She reached out and took Delara's hand, squeezing firmly. Thank you for bringing light back to this family. Martha would have loved you. Delara felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. That means more than you know. The world is changing, the woman said. Slowly, but it is changing. People like you and Finley, you are leading the way. Do not let anyone make you feel like your love is less than. It is more than, because it takes real courage. She smiled. Now come, let me introduce you to some of the other ladies. Most of them are nosy but harmless. The rest of the festival passed in a blur of introductions and conversations and moments of real connection. Not everyone was accepting, but enough were that Delara felt hope kindle in her chest. Maybe Fiona and Flynn would grow up in a world where their mixed heritage was not something to hide but something to celebrate. Maybe things really were changing, one family at a time. They returned home a week later, tired but happy, with gifts piled high in the wagon and memories that would last through the long winter. The valley welcomed them back with snow-covered silence and the familiar comfort of their own space. It was good, Finley said as they unpacked, but I am glad to be home. Me too, Delara agreed, hanging up their winter coats. Although Fiona might disagree, she has not stopped talking about the candy Grandpa Franklin gave her. She will get over it once she remembers all her toys are here. Finley caught Delara around the waist and pulled her close. I love our life. I love our family. I love you. I just wanted to say that. I love you too, she said, going up on her toes to kiss him. Always. The years continued their steady march. Fiona grew tall and curious, showing an early aptitude for working with animals that made Franklin beam with pride. Flynn grew into a sturdy, serious little boy who loved to build things with his father and ask endless questions about how everything worked. They added twin girls to the family in the 5th year, Deanna and Daphne, who had their mother's green skin and their father's easy laugh. The homestead expanded. They built the workshop Finley had dreamed of, and it became a source of steady income, his furniture sought after for its quality and craftsmanship. The orchards produced abundant fruit, and Delara's preserves became famous at the winter markets. The cattle herd grew to respectable size, managed with help from seasonal hands and advice from Franklin. They had hard years too. A bad winter that killed half the calves. A summer drought that stressed the gardens. Sickness that swept through and left them all weak and shaken. But they faced everything together. Delara and Finley and their growing family, anchored by the promise he had made that long-ago autumn night. No human ever stayed. Delara had whispered, certain of her isolation. "I will be the first," Finley had promised. And he had kept that promise through everything. On their 10th anniversary, Franklin organized a celebration at the ranch, bringing together everyone who had been part of their journey. Marcus came, older now but still sharp-eyed and smiling. The Johnson brothers came with their wives and children. Neighbors from the valley and friends from town filled the big house with laughter and music and joy. Delara stood on the porch as evening fell, watching Finley dance with Fiona while the twins chased fireflies and Flynn helped Franklin light lanterns. She thought about the girl she had been 10 years ago, so certain that love was not meant for her. She thought about the man who had proven her wrong with his steadiness and his stubborn refusal to give up on her. "Beautiful evening," Franklin said, coming to stand beside her. He looked older now, his hair gone fully white and his movements slower, but his eyes were bright and happy. "It is," Delara agreed. "I wanted to thank you again, for everything, but especially for giving me a second chance at being a father, at being family." He was quiet for a moment. "I wasted so many years being hard and closed off. I do not want to waste any more." "You are not wasting anything," Delara said firmly. "You are here. You are present. The children adore you. That is what matters." Franklin smiled. "Those children are the light of my life. And their parents are not too bad either." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "You know, when Finley first came back with you, I was scared, not of you but of failing again, of saying the wrong thing and driving him away. But you made it easy. You made everything easy." "It was not always easy," Delara said honestly, "but it was always worth it. The best things usually are." Franklin watched Finley swing Fiona in a circle, her delighted laughter ringing across the yard. "He is happy, really happy. I never saw him like this when he was young. You did that." "We did that," Delara corrected. "All of us together." The music changed and Finley appeared at her elbow, slightly breathless, grinning widely. "Dance with me, always," she said, taking his offered hand. He led her into the improvised dance floor, spinning her gently, holding her close. Around them, friends and family swayed to the music. But Delara only had eyes for her husband, for the man who had stayed when everyone else left, who had built a life with her brick by patient brick. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, echoing the question he had asked so many times over the years. "About promises," she said. "About the one you made me 10 years ago. To stay," she confirmed. "You know, I did not believe you at first. I was so sure you would leave. I know, you had every reason to doubt." He pulled her closer, his cheek resting against her hair. "I am glad I got to prove you wrong. So am I." She tilted her face up to look at him. "Thank you for keeping your promise. Every single day for 10 years you kept it. It was never hard," he said seriously. "You are my home, Delara. Wherever you are, that is where I want to be. That will never change." The music swelled and they moved together, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from hope and hard work. Around them, their families celebrated, their children played, their friends rejoiced. It was everything Delara had never dared to dream of and more than she had ever hoped to have. As the stars came out overhead and the lanterns glowed golden in the gathering dark, Finley pulled her close and whispered against her ear, "I love you. Today, tomorrow, forever." "I love you too," she whispered back. "More than words can say." And there, in the warm summer night with music playing and family all around, Delara finally believed with her whole heart what Finley had been showing her for 10 years. Love was not something that left. Real love, true love, stayed. It put down roots and built homes and made promises it kept through hard times and good. No human ever stayed, she had once believed, but one had. One stubborn, kind, wonderful man had stayed, and in staying had changed everything. Had given her family and home and a future she never imagined possible. Had taken her whispered fear and silenced it with a promise he kept every single day. And that, Delara thought as Finley spun her one more time, and their children's laughter rang out across the valley. That was the truest kind of magic there was. The celebration wound down as the night grew late, families collecting sleepy children and heading home, friends offering hugs and well wishes before departing. Franklin retired to his room with a final wave, and the older children went to bed in the guest rooms, leaving Delara and Finley alone on the porch with the twins sleeping in a tangled pile on a blanket nearby. "Today was perfect," Delara said softly, not wanting to disturb the peaceful quiet. "It was," Finley agreed. He was sitting in Franklin's rocking chair with Delara perched on the arm, his hand warm on her back. 10 years. It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life. That I get to have you and the children and all of this." "Believe it," he said, kissing the top of her head. "This is real. We made it real." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the night sounds of the ranch settling down. An owl called from the barn. A cow lowed softly in the distant pasture. The wind rustled through the apple trees Franklin had planted the year Fiona was born, now grown tall and strong. "What do you think the next 10 years will bring?" Delara asked. Finley considered. "The children growing up. Fiona probably ready to start helping seriously with the horses. Flynn building his first piece of furniture. The twins getting into everything," he smiled. "More hard work, more good times, more of us together." "That sounds perfect. It does not it?" He shifted so he could see her face better. "I never imagined I could be this content, this settled. When I was younger, I thought happiness meant freedom from responsibility. But this, what we have, this is better than anything I could have dreamed." Delara thought about the woman she had been, alone in her cabin, convinced that solitude was her fate. She thought about the night Finley had promised to stay, and how terrified she had been that he would break that promise like everyone else. She thought about all the moments since then, the building and growing and learning and loving, the slow accumulation of ordinary days that added up to an extraordinary life. "I used to think I did not need anyone," she said quietly, "that I was fine on my own, and I was fine, I was surviving. But you taught me the difference between surviving and thriving. You taught me that letting someone in does not make you weak, it makes you whole." "You taught me the same thing," Finley said. "You taught me that running was not the same as freedom, that facing hard things head-on is how you grow. That real courage is staying when leaving would be easier." His hand found hers, fingers lacing together in the familiar gesture that still made her heart skip. "We taught each other how to be better." "We did," Delara agreed. "We still are." They gathered the sleeping twins and made their way inside, navigating the dark house with the ease of long practice. After tucking the girls into their temporary beds and checking on the older children, they retired to their own room, the one Franklin always kept ready for them. As they settled into bed, Finley pulled Delara close, her back to his chest, his arm secure around her waist. "Tomorrow we head home," he murmured. "Back to the valley. Back to our life," Delara added. "Our beautiful, chaotic, perfect life." She felt him smile against her shoulder. "I cannot wait." Delara closed her eyes, surrounded by warmth and safety and the steady presence of the man who had kept every promise he ever made her. Outside, the ranch slept peacefully under the stars. Inside, her family dreamed secure and happy. And here, in the circle of Finley's arms, Delara felt the bone-deep certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. No human ever stayed, she had whispered a decade ago, her voice full of fear and resignation. "I will be the first," Finley had promised. "I am not going anywhere," and he had not. Through 10 years and 4 children and all the joys and sorrows that came with building a life, he had stayed. He had anchored himself to her and to their family with roots that went deep and strong. He had turned her whispered fear into a distant memory, replaced it with the solid reality of his presence, his love, his unwavering commitment. As sleep pulled her under, warm and content and utterly at peace, Delara's last thought was simple and true. He stayed. He kept his promise. And that made all the difference.